One Child, Two Languages in Action was created as a companion to the book One Child, Two Languages, Second Edition, written by Patton O. Tabers. This workshop on educating young second language learners was presented to the professional staff of the Capic Head Start program, serving Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop, Massachusetts. The workshop presenters are Patton Tabers and Mariela Baez.
In many of the classrooms where you're teaching, you're going to find that there are students who are English language learners who are starting to learn English, perhaps for the first time when they get to your classroom. It means that you're going to have perhaps a lot of Spanish speakers, children that speak Spanish at home and are entering Head Start to learn English. It might mean that you not only have a concentration of Spanish speakers, but you have a lot of other languages represented in your classroom. And we're here today to talk to you about what can you do to be a more effective professional in classrooms like this, and how can we learn more about those students?
Who is a bilingual child? What do we mean by this term, bilingual? Who wants to give me some other terms that go along with bilingual? What springs to mind when you hear the term bilingual? Who is this child? Yep. Speaks two languages. Is it easy to know if a child's bilingual? Do you know right away? So you see the child or you're with the child for a few minutes, do you know immediately if they're bilingual? Sorry?
Most of the time, yeah.
Not all the time?
Not all the time, no.
Why would that be?
Sometimes because when they grow here, they don't have an accent at all.
Okay.
And some of them have an accent, and we notice.
Okay. That's an interesting distinction.
The child doesn't have an accent.
Uh-huh.
You don't know
Okay.
if they grow here or not.
Okay. So if a child is native-like in more than one language, sounds like an American kid in English, but speaks her culturally appropriate Spanish, for example, you can't tell if you don't speak that other language, and you can't have a chance to talk to that child in that other language. So how many people in this room are bilingual? Okay. Now, you're basing that on probably your proficiency in two languages. However, how I'm thinking of bilingualism is someone who is exposed to at least two languages. It's not about proficiency. It's not about really good at two languages. But if you are exposed to more than one language and consequently need to sort of be able to understand a bit of a second language at least, then I think you qualify as bilingual. Now, how many of you in the room who didn't raise your hand last time would raise your hand now? Okay, exactly. Because we don't live in a monolingual society. We are immersed in a multicultural, multilingual society. And we've all acquired abilities to use other languages. So that makes us, I guess, all bilingual.
How children learn language. Why is language development so important?
First of all, children need to understand and use language to make sense of the world. It's one of the ways that children, after they've finished putting everything in their mouth and finish, playing in the mud and getting everything under control by touching it, they start to use their words, and we start to use words with them to explain the world.
¿No? ¿No quieres hacer una tortilla con leche? ¿Qué tamaño es? ¿Esa es chiquita? No, es grande, grande.
No, es chiquita, mira.
Yo la veo grande.
Yo mira chiquita.
¿Tú la miras chiquita?
Secondly, they need it to establish social relationships with others. Think of the child who is shy, or the child who's reserved, or the child who hasn't acquired a lot of language in the language that's being used by the other children. They don't have a lot of social options. They really need language. to connect with the other kids.
You wanna play? You gonna cook for me? What are you gonna cook? Fish? Oh, Makai have the fish.
And finally, we know that language is the basis for literacy, and that the language abilities and skills that young children bring to literacy are the ones that they need as foundations for what they're going to be learning in a literacy context. It may seem obvious. It's important to remember. Where do children come by their language? At home, with their families, with their loved ones, with the people they know.
Qué costumbre que tiene cuando uno está sentado.
Sí.
First language acquisition.
There are 5 basic principles, 5 basic areas of language that young children have to get familiar with and begin to use. Now, right now, I'm just going to talk about in their first language. So this is what they have to accomplish in the first 5 years, just in their first language. First of all, they need to develop phonological abilities. How does this language sound? What do these sounds mean? Babies start with babbling, and then they start putting words, one word, and then more words together. This is all part of their phonological development. Secondly, they need those words, because that's really the basis for much of conversation. You've got to have the words that name everything around you. Everything has a name. And as a young child, you have to learn every single one of those names for anything you might want to talk about or anything that someone talks to you about. Then you have to be able to put the words together so they make sense, and so people understand what you say. Young children use one word, then they use 2 words, then they use 3 or 4 words together in a sentence, and we all celebrate every single time they move from one of those periods to the next, because it's very exciting to see their language developing. They have to do this. Nobody does it for them. They have to do this for themselves.
I get a big one.
You're gonna get a big one?
I get a big one. I get a big giant one. Like this. Like this. I got one like this big.
Like
I got
apple, right?
like this big. I get this one big. I got this
Sometimes
one big.
apples they're big,
I got like this.
right?
I
Small
got
and
big.
big.
I got big like this. Like big.
Finally, and more sophisticatedly, they put sentences together to tell stories, to explain something that's going on, to have an argument with you about something. This is known as discourse. And these discourse skills are higher level language abilities that children develop 4, 5, 6, 7 years old and beyond. And finally, there's an area of language study called pragmatics. And pragmatics is different from these other areas that I was just talking about, because it's not the language you use, but it's how you use language. So if you are a young kid and you've just learned how to talk about other people, and you talk about somebody loudly in front of them and say something you're not supposed to say, somebody's going to say to you, no, you can't say that. You're not supposed to say that. Well, you've just learned how to say it, and now somebody's saying you can't say it. What sense does that make? Well, the sense is that there are cultural rules about what you can say, who you can talk to, how straightforward you can be talking to someone. And every culture has these rules, and what you learn when you're learning language is you're learning as well what the rules are for using that language.
Second language acquisition.
Okay, so say you're 5 years old and you've gone through this whole process, this complicated, extensive process, and now somebody says you have to do it all over again. Okay, you've learned the language. I'm done with that. Well, you're never done, but now you're not only not done with that language, now you got to start a new one. Does somebody hand you a grammar book and say, here, study this? Yeah, there's a test on Tuesday? No. Do you go back to where you were when you were a baby and start over again? Not quite. Here's the developmental sequence that researchers have seen with children who are 3, 4, or 5 years old who come into, let's say, an English-speaking context. They come with their home language, and now they are starting over again. They often start just using their home language in the new situation. Now, in a bilingual classroom, that's great. You know, there's somebody there who speaks the child's home language. If there's a match, they can keep using their home language as well while they're waiting to begin to learn some English. But in some circumstances, that's not possible. Okay? It takes some children a while to figure out who's bilingual, who understands me when I speak this language, but they're pretty good at it, aren't they? They're pretty quick when it comes to figuring out who speaks the language that they know and speak. If they're in a situation where there isn't anybody who speaks their home language, then they go into a nonverbal situation where they do stop talking, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what other things they do during that nonverbal period. What children are doing during this period is they're collecting data about this new language. They're listening and they're watching, and they're even rehearsing a little bit about the ways they can use this language, but they're doing it so quietly that you might not hear them. When kids finally do start talking, they use very short words to express themselves, and they use formulaic phrases. So you'll hear kids say things like, I want to play with you. Now, do they know what I want to play with you means? Maybe not. They just know they've heard other children walk up to someone and say, I want to play with you. They get the whole chunk. They get the whole piece. And they use it in social situations to get into conversation with other kids.
Give me high five. Because that's the first time you've ever put your coat on without any help from the teachers. Excellent. Yeah. Look at you and you, Alexa.
I did it. I did it.
And then eventually, they take those I want to play with yous, and they begin to break them up into the pieces. And they can start a lot of sentences with I wanna, or I want to, and they can then think about other things that they want to put at the end of that sentence. I want to go. I want to see you. I want a green crayon. That's how they build their new sentences. So here are 4 characteristics that have something to do with how quickly a child may learn a new language. How old they are, how outgoing they are, how motivated they might be, and how much time they're spending in the new language environment. Let's look at the first one, age. Older or younger? Easier for the 3-year-old or the 5-year-old to learn a new language? In fact, the 5-year-old is going to learn faster because it's more motivated, he understands the process better, further along in first language acquisition, so there's more to move over to this new area, and they're cognitively much more advanced than 3-year-olds. Why do we think that younger kids are better first, second language learners? Think about how little they need to do to impress us. All they have to do is know 10 or 15 words, okay? And then bingo, we think they've got it. Well, you'd expect a lot more from a 3-year-old speaking their home language. By the time they're 5 years old, we really expect children to have a lot of proficiency in their first language. So we're asking more each age that we go up. We're asking more of the second language learning process. So, but between 3 and 5, the 5-year-old will probably learn more quickly, but not necessarily because they've got these other factors as well. What do I mean by personality? Outgoing, shy, and reserved. There are children who are listeners, who aren't risk takers, who want to be, you know, left alone to do their own thing. And then there are kids for whom the overt part is much more obvious. I think those are 2 just distinctive ways of approaching the situation. Motivation refers to how much does a child want to learn a new language. And it's kind of hard to think about a 3 or a 4-year-old having psyched this all out, but guess what? They have. They have decided, oh, it's too much work. Or, oh my gosh, you know, I want to play with so-and-so. And if I want to play with so-and-so, then I've got to do this, that, and the other thing. So motivation can come from decisions like that about who they want to, it's known as affiliation, who do they want to affiliate with, who do they want to play with, who do they want to be with. And finally, exposure. If you go to a program where English is spoken for 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day, or 6 hours a day, which one do you think is a more intense English language learning situation? The 6, exactly. So the trade-off is that if you're hearing English 6 hours a day, guess what you're not hearing? You're not hearing your home language during those hours when you might have been at home instead. So that's another trade-off in terms of how kids approach language. So when people say to me, well, how long is it going to take for a child to learn a new language? I say, well, it depends. And they don't like that answer, but it really is a developmental, individual, cognitively challenging process. It depends on how the child takes on the process.
Supporting second language learners in the classroom. Communicating with second language learners.
A little while ago, we were talking about how young children start using their language in the classroom, but how can we help them get to that point, and what are teachers doing to make that happen? Over here, a few moments ago, we had someone say, well, I use gestures, and I use quite a bit of nonverbal communication. And I said, well, double that message. Use words too. Everybody has a tendency to use gestures to emphasize what they're saying. And I think teachers who are used to working with younger children know to double the message. Say what you're saying, show what you're saying at the same time. Works beautifully with second language learners. Say it again and again. Talk about what's right here in front of the child. It's always easier to talk about what everybody's looking at than to talk about something far, far away.
How do you say cinnamon in Spanish? Canela. Canela. And this one is cinnamon. You see? You want to smell it? What does it smell like? What does it smell like?
Good.
It's delicious. It smells so delicious. What color is it? Brown. Good job.
Expanding and extending are techniques that you would use with a toddler as well. If a child approaches you with a car, and they're very proud of the fact that they know the word car, and they show you the car and say, car, you can say, oh, it's a blue car. So right there, you're adding information, a new word, maybe not new, but you know, maybe it's good to say it again. Right there, you've got the child's attention, you've got the object, you've got the topic. And you can say it right on the spot and expand that child's knowledge. Upping the ante. What this means is that some of the children that I was doing research on got really good at nonverbal communication to the point where they just thought it wasn't really a good idea to bother to start using their new language. So one of the little boys came up to me one day and he pointed to his shoelace, which was untied. And I said, and I knew he could do a lot better than that. So I just looked at him as if I didn't understand. And he finally said, shoe. And I looked down. Oh my goodness, your shoelace is untied. What would you like me to do? Long pause. Tie. Ah, I can tie your shoe. Okay? So not letting children get away with all of these wonderful techniques for not communicating by asking a little bit more. If it doesn't come, then you supply it. But give them a chance. Give them a chance to put it together for you.
What's this?
What's that?
You know.
You know too. Go ahead.
Burrito.
Huh?
It's a burrito.
No.
Burrito.
Start with the L. Letter.
Classroom organization.
There are a couple of things you can do that help children get into the routines. I think the routines in the classroom are so critical because that way children figure out what's happening here and they're able to move from one place to another without having to seek help. They know what the routines are, they follow the routines.
Once a child comes into the classroom and they are productive in following routine on a daily basis, then what is expected is just naturally instilled in them. Day by day, they're able to come in and rely on their past experience.
Have a place in the classroom where they can get away from it all. If you've ever been in a really stressful situation where you've had to do something, perform, be part of a group for a long period of time, sometimes you just want to get away, where people aren't going to ask questions. They're not going to require something of you. Someplace that you can go and be by yourself. And I think a table with some manipulatives on it, or just something they can play with their hands and fingers and get away from the rest of the group, that's a really, really nice place to have in your classroom. Make sure when you do small group activities around a table that you decide who's coming to that table. And you think about what's a good mix around the table. Do I want all Spanish speakers so we can do this in Spanish? Or do I want a mix of children so I can go back and forth? Do I want some children who are more accomplished at this, who can show the other children what to do? Pay attention in small group situations to who's at the table and what you're expecting each of those children to get from what you're doing.
Good job.
Curriculum support. Activity selection.
I observed in a Head Start classroom where the head teacher had everybody come to circle before activity time. And he would bring to circle, he had a lot of second language learners in his classroom, and he would bring to the circle a paintbrush for the painting activity, some Play-Doh for the table that was going to have Play-Doh activities.
So let me show you what we're going to be doing today so you can choose where you want to start your morning. Okay? At one table, we're going to have puzzles. Puzzles. Rompecabezas. We're also going to have what opened? What are we going to have open today? La mesa de agua. I know. Hay muchas cosas que escoger. ¿Con qué quieres jugar? Water table. Roll up your sleeves. Pull them all the way up.
So they knew right away, they didn't have to understand everything he was saying. They knew right away, oh, if I want to paint, I go over and I show him the paintbrush is what I want to do.
To do the colors or to stamp letters with Anna? Okay, so take one. Angel, come. Which one do you want to do?
Book reading, small groups. I think that having a whole group of children sitting for 20 minutes, listening to a book they don't understand, in a language they don't feel that comfortable with yet, a waste of everybody's time. If you want to get a group of the Spanish kids together and read a book in Spanish, or another group of kids together who speak a variety of other languages and tailor it to them, thinking strategically about every single situation in the classroom. How can I use this to help children develop more language? Snack and lunch. Kids sit at the table, adults go someplace else? No, no. Always thinking about things you can be talking about, saying to the children, building their vocabulary.
Alain, ¿quieres un pedazo de pan? ¿Y tú, Fátima? Terminaste la manzana y el pan, Ana. ¿Puedes tomar un poco de leche? Good job. ¿Y tú quieres leche? Un poquito de leche. Para que te ponga fuerte y grande. A ver, ¿quién puede decirme cómo se dice apple en español?
Manzana.
Manzana. ¿Y cómo se dice manzana en inglés? How do you say manzana in English?
Apple.
Do a trade. You know, you want to know this word in my language, I want to know this word in your language. So everybody becomes a second language learner in the classroom.
I'm learning Spanish in this environment that I'm working in. The children are able to teach me Spanish as I play with them. They're able to say, Miss Melanie, this is how you say milk, leche. Miss Melanie, this is how you say table, la mesa. And I'm learning the language every day. I'm building my own vocabulary.
Outside time. Well, kids need some time off to run around, right? They do, and they will. But there are games that can be done that will increase language development too, right? So thinking about some organizational kinds of things where the kids can get their exercise, but they can also hear some language in a context. I'm not sure how important Duck, Duck, Goose or Ring Around the Rosie is, but kids love it. There were children who I hadn't heard a sound from, not a peep, for months and months and months. They learned Duck, Duck, Goose, and they're shouting it. They're so excited. So anything you can do to break through that beginning shyness is important. And finally, circle time, where I think most of us think of this as the sort of teaching moment and the presentation of information moment. Keeping it visual, keeping it quick and sprightly so that everybody's not sitting there for a long period of time, and making it important for the children in terms of what they're going to be doing the rest of the day or what kinds of things you want them to be learning.
What do we do now? Before we play, we talk about the what? The weather. So we're going to look at the weather board with Anna. So put your meteorologist hat on. Okay? And Stephanie's a meteorologist today too. Walk over to the window and you're going to report back to us what the weather is. What is the weather today?
It's sunny.
It's sunny?
And cold.
Can you find the picture that represents the sun? Great.
Thank you, Angelina.
Anna's going to take that. And how do we say sun in Spanish?
It's sun.
Sola. Sola. Stephanie, what else is the weather? What's going on? It's cold. Can you find the picture that represents cold? Good job. How do we say cold in Spanish?
Frío.
Frío. Can you show me when you're cold? Show me how it goes.
Breathing,
Oh, yeah. Look at his mouth shake. Good job. Thank you, meteorologist.
Focusing on language and literacy in the classroom. Literacy activities for young children. Let's think about the language and literacy skills that are important in early childhood development. Researchers have consistently identified 5 areas related to children's ability to read and write. They are alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, book and print concepts, vocabulary knowledge, and discourse skills.
Alphabet knowledge is built from teachers who do activities that target letter recognition. What's this letter? What's this letter? Name the letters. Children are learning to identify the letters of the alphabet.
Los niños cuando están con los nombres, que ellos primero cogen la primera letra y algunos niños no saben el idioma de los demás niños, pero al reconocer las letras sí saben cada nombre. Los nombres de los niños, te dicen todos los nombres de los niños y es lo único que ellos a veces pueden decir.
So kids might not know all the letters in the alphabet, but they are motivated to learn the letters of their friends and the names of their friends. So their idea was to make the initial letter of the names in a different color and focus on that because kids are motivated to learn the names of their friends in the classroom.
¿Quieres saber? Enséñamelo. This is for Siona, okay. The C for Say. No? This is for Nicolás? Okay, yeah, that's true. Can be C. Look it. Alain, look it. It's like a C. Or can be N for Nicolás. Okay?
Phonological awareness, what do teachers do? Activities that emphasize the sounds that make up words. What do kids learn? They learn to identify those sounds that make up those words. Bilingual children are very tuned in to the sounds of language. They will get this when you work on phonological awareness.
What song would you like to sing? The Itsy Bitsy Spider? Sure.
Bitsy spider, out the river come.
The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout.
Rhyming and singing and clapping out the syllables of their names in English and Spanish and seeing the difference.
Nice. Can you do a demonstration of what that looks like?
Well, Patty, Gladys, Mary Ann, and then we could graph maybe the different sounds. Who had two claps in their names or the three claps and so on, and graph that.
Book and print concept really refers to all of the things that you do with books so that children feel comfortable around books. They know how books work. They know where the beginning is and where the end is. And of course, if they come from an Arabic background, they know where the beginning is and where the end is because it's different. So how do books work? What is their role in our lives? All of that is a book and print concepts.
What part of the book is this? What part of the book is this? What part of the book is this? The front of the book. Can you help me read the title? That's what friends are for. Great reading. You guys are great readers.
These are activities that show how the book works. And these are the kinds of things that children learn from any activity that you do around a book where you explicitly talk about who's the author, who's the illustrator, why did the author put this information on this page. How does this work?
Le podemos leer un libro a los niños. Entonces, después de que los niños aprendan lo que hay en el libro, ellos pueden hacer su mismo libro. Con eso, los niños van a aumentar el vocabulario.
Sí, el vocabulario, muy bien.
Van a aumentar el vocabulario. También van a aprender a identificar los objetos, porque van a estar por los retratos. Y también van a empezar a aprender a letter discrimination.
Sí, letter knowledge. Muy bien, muy bien. So they were talking about basically using the book and readings of the book so that children can start to learn about the sequence of events, create their own story, their own book, and work on vocabulary knowledge and letter knowledge at the same time that you're working on books and print concepts. Yeah, excellent. Yes, with the pictures in the book. Perfect.
Along comes theater's friend, the bird. Why are you sitting here in the middle of the forest? Asked the bird.
She had a ballet.
Great reading. And I can't walk.
I can't
And I can't go meet my
cousins
at the end of the
forest.
Says to the end of the forest, says the bird to Theodore. It's nice to give advice, says Theodore. That's what friends are for, says the bird.
There's an estimate that children learn 6 to 10 new words a day in the early childhood time period. No flashcards, just learning them from conversations, from hearing them, from hearing you use them, from hearing parents use them. A lot of words. And for bilingual kids, 2 sets.
¿Y qué más estás comiendo? ¿Cómo se llama eso?
Bread and cheese.
Bread and cheese. That's a good breakfast, huh? How about you, Leilani? Apples? What else are you eating?
Bread and cheese.
¿Qué es eso? Bread. ¿Y en español? ¿Sabes cómo se dice bread en español? ¿Quién sabe cómo se dice bread en español?
I know.
How?
Pan.
Pan. Este pan está muy rico, ¿verdad?
Yeah.
Pan. Bread or pan. That's right.
The kinds of activities that teachers engage in, emphasizing words and their meanings. Knowing a word, how to say it, doesn't mean you know what it means. When I talked about young children being able to memorize chunks of words, often a child will have a word, know how to pronounce it, know the kind of situation that it works for, but they don't have the full meaning of the word. So being explicit about what words mean is really important.
We all came together as a group when we chose labeling. And the reason why is, one, because it eliminates assumptions of what a child actually knows. For example, when we label the fridge, they're actually identified with the letter and then the meaning behind it, instead of walking into a room and there's nothing labeled and we assume, okay, the child knows. If I say go to the fridge, he knows what the fridge is. And Joanne brought a great point to the table, which was labeling identifies with action. Like if we label the carpet and we say, let's walk across the carpet as an activity, they would associate it better and learn better. And it would also meet the quota of 6 to 10 words a day.
You were impressed with the 6 to 10.
I really am. I really am. That's like my goal now. This says butter.
Here it is.
It's right over there, Stephanie. You found the butter. How do we say it in Spanish?
Queso.
Queso?
Yeah.
Or what about the other one? Mantequilla?
Mantequilla.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I got that at my house.
So now you have it at your house too?
Yeah.
And guess where we have it today? Where are we? Are we at our house?
At school.
We're in school. So butter is in
School.
in school.
Telling a story, giving an explanation, anticipating where a story is going to go. How is this story going to work?
One child last year, her mother missed the very first parent meeting that she missed. So the daughter had drawn what had happened that made them miss the meeting. There was a page, there was a tree in front of her house, there was no car because no one had come to pick them up. It started snowing, and they couldn't walk, and she drew all the stages. And it was really cute, but it showed how much she brought the writing to herself, that she could, and the sophistication that she could illustrate for herself what happened the night before and why they didn't make it. But sometimes they'll retell the stories that we've read. They'll make their own Eric Carle books, and they'll read those to the class.
Any activity that a teacher does that encourages telling stories, explaining how the world works, building a fantasy world. Go back to the socio-dramatic area and talk with children as they're building their fantasy worlds. Use language to encourage their use of fantasy talk.
So
you're gonna cook our rice.
I'm cooking you some rice. I'm going to cook you some rice.
You're gonna cook some rice?
No. This one or white.
I want white one. Huh? Okay, go get your shoes so I can put it out. Sí, te lo puedes quitar otra
Okay,
vez.
done. Eat it.
Adapting literacy activities for second language learners.
First of all, alphabet knowledge and phonological awareness help children concentrate on the sounds and symbols in English. Could that be a bad thing? No, that cannot be a bad thing. That's exactly where they're at. That's what they need to be doing. They need to be concentrating on sounds. And the symbols that go with the sounds will come right after. And they will pick up on the connection between the alphabet and the sounds very, very quickly. They like this kind of activity. It's very concrete, very skill building. Second language learners can use it to develop their repertoire of understanding of sounds in English. Book and print concepts. This is obviously extremely important for young second language learners. And you'll know when they can handle this kind of information in the book reading context. It doesn't come as early as the alphabet and the sounds. It comes later in the process. Vocabulary development all the time, every moment of every day. You should be thinking about presenting new words, what their words mean to children, using visual aids, using objects, using everything that's there in the classroom in front of you, bringing things in, having them bring things in, so that vocabulary saturates everything you do every day in the classroom. And finally, the discourse skills are really the last to develop. They're the last to develop with children whose first language is English. Lots of 4- and 5-year-olds are working very hard on discourse level abilities in their first language. So second language learners are going to take a while to get there. What I found in my research was that the second language learning children didn't even go into the house play area. Because the house play area, it was very clear, was where all, or lots, of discourse level conversation was going on. Fantasy play, sociodramatic play, you're the mommy, I'm the daddy, setting up all of these very elaborate scenarios. The second language learning kids couldn't do that yet in their other language. They could do it in their first language, and if you can get a group together to do that in their first language, terrific, do it, because they need that support. Okay, they need that support. But it'll be a little bit slower coming in their second language.
Including the home languages.
Now, I like to take this a step further and think about how we can include the home languages and literacies of the second language learning children. And I first want to convince you that this is a great idea. And it's not hard, because I know from talking with some of you and with Joanne that you are already involving teachers that speak the children's home language, and you're bringing that to the classrooms. But I'm here to tell you that research is supporting this exact same idea.
I try and read and speak and do signs and labels, everything in the two languages, English and Spanish. And when I read, even if the book is not in Spanish, I can translate in my head and read it in Spanish. And if they answer a question in Spanish, I will follow what they answer in Spanish. If I ask the question in English and they answer in Spanish, that's fine too. I try and translate, because there are children that speak only English. If they want to sing songs in Spanish, I encourage it. Anything that they would like to do in their home language, that's fine with me. I don't have a problem.
When second language learners see that you're including their language and you give them an opportunity by including the home language to be experts, to be the stars, they feel welcome, they feel their language is being valued, their culture is represented. It's also a way of building pride in their language and culture, and having other children understand the diversity that exists in the classroom. Over the years, I've seen in many classrooms how they make efforts to include their home language and even talk about it. That's one thing that I think is so important, to not make it a secret. Oh, you know, Juan, he doesn't speak English. No, no, no. It can never be like that. It has to be, Juan speaks another language at home, and here he's learning English. It has to be like that, open, acknowledged, valued.
Porque es un sándwich y voy a ponerles más cebollas.
Ok, ponle más cebollas.
Okay.
It's important to support the first language because we need to think about the task that young children face when they're learning a new language. We don't want the 4-year-old to come in and forget everything he has learned for the past 4 years. We don't want that. We don't want them to start from scratch. We want them to build on the knowledge they already have. And so you can use the first language to learn a second language. It can be the foundation. You can transfer skills from one language to the other. And if teachers use the first language as a tool, they can help in this process.
Working with parents. Collecting information from home.
I start early during the school year when we do the home visits. I get prepared. I talk to the advocate and find out what the home language is. And when I do the home visit, if it's Spanish, and if the mother is comfortable in Spanish, I do everything in Spanish. But I get a lot of the information from the parents, like what type of, how much English do they speak or understand? What kind of things do they like to do? Like what kind of songs? Do they like to count in English? What can they do?
Hola Judy, ¿cómo está? ¿Cómo le ha ido todo?
Bien, gracias.
Oh, ok, gracias.
Bueno, el propósito de la visita hoy es, vamos a hablar de lenguaje. Queremos saber los diferentes lenguajes de la familia que tenemos en el programa. ¿Y cuál es su lenguaje?
Español.
¿Y el de su esposo?
Español.
¿Y de qué país son los?
Del Salvador.
Del Salvador.
Home language inventory.
This inventory allows you to look at what language this child is being exposed to. If you consider the mother is only speaking Somali to the child. The father is using mostly Somali. The brother might be using mostly Somali, and the aunt is using only Somali. Notice that you have the range from only the first language of the home to only English. And it can go really throughout that range. When this child enters your classroom, what do you think this child will? This child, yes. Only Somali, yes. So this child will be monolingual in Somali and start learning English as he or she enters the classroom. And this is what we usually call incipient bilinguals. Now, let's look at a different case. In doing the home language inventory, we discovered that this child is being exposed to more than just Spanish. There's a grandmother in the household that speaks only Spanish to the child, and the mother speaks both English and Spanish. Father speaks mostly Spanish. The sister speaks mostly English. This is very common, especially if you have older siblings. Among the children, they're speaking more English than the home language. And a caretaker who speaks only English. Now, when this child shows up to your classroom, what can we expect? Is this similar to the other child? No. Yes. Now, this is a child that we would call emergent bilingual. So here's a child who you know is going to have some skills in English. Still, the child is bilingual and is learning and is being exposed to Spanish at home and can use that language in the classroom. But this is a child that you know has been learning some English, so you can count on that and use that in your classrooms.
Including parents in the classroom.
By including parents in the classroom, you're making a point that you want to support their home language and that you think maintaining the language, the home language is important. It's an important step to take.
Isha is a former parent who comes into the classroom. She comes in to speak with the children from Somalia, and they sit and play in their own language. She's able to communicate, make them feel comfortable. she's also able to create an environment where the children, if they have any kind of emotional or physical needs, she's able to address it. And seeing a familiar face throughout the center each day just helps the children adapt to the environment that they're in.
Answering parents' questions.
Another part of working with parents has to do with answering their questions. And here I'm just going to present a few of the questions that we often hear when we work with bilingual parents. What language should we be speaking at home? The media message on this is very clear. What do you think parents are hearing these days? English. Yes. In fact, I've talked to many parents that are really anxious and concerned about this. They wonder if they should switch to English, even though they don't know the language. And my answer is always the same. You need to use the language that you feel most comfortable speaking. Don't give up your home language. If that's the language you feel comfortable speaking, that's the language you want your children to speak to you, continue using the home language. And there are many reasons why, but the first reason is because that's the foundation for children to then later acquire English. Remember, language skills transfer.
We try and make the parents comfortable with the idea of keeping the home language. And we encourage them to read to them if they want to in their home language. Speak to them, sing the songs that maybe they were brought up with in their language. Go grocery shopping and speak in their language. Anything to do with their language, it's definitely welcome and encouraged.
Más papel, ya vamos a traer más papel. Vaya. Con la manzana, Dieguito.
What do we do if our child does not want to speak our home language? I think parents often experience this, that when children go into a classroom where English is the language spoken and other children are speaking English and that's the language that's being valued, they want to switch to English, and they sometimes come back to the home and they don't want to speak the first language or the home language, the language that parents are using. You need to have strategies to work with children before this happens. So before the child stops wanting to speak that language. Have some ideas of things that you can do or even rules that you can have. I think some parents, because they're not as familiar with the research, they think they might put their child in jeopardy. They're not very assertive about doing. And the message that I hope you can communicate to parents is that yes, it's important, continue with your home language, because it really is going to help them in the long run, and it's important that they communicate in this language.
Making it happen.
If any of the things that we've talked about today, and certainly many of the things that you've contributed to this conversation, have gotten you excited, gotten you interested, gotten you motivated to do some things a little bit differently in your classroom this year, I'm sure it would be supported all the way down the line, and I would salute you for those decisions.
When planning to make a change in your classroom, here are some questions you'll need to answer to make it happen. What do you want to do? What will you need? Who will you involve? How long will it take? What do you want to achieve? And what did you achieve?
So first of all, setting goals. Secondly, rounding up the resources to do it. And thirdly, having the time and the energy to go ahead and do what you want to do. I want to thank every one of you so much for everything you've done today and helped us and participated and made this all possible. Thank you so much for your help. Thanks.